Good, then I'll just get started now. Topic now is practical Power Platform data loss prevention policy. So focus is mainly on the practical. Just going to talk a bit about my experiences. Obviously, that requires, I'm still going to talk a bit also about the theoretical stuff, or not the theoretical, basically the basics, the foundation, so that everybody has an idea of what am I actually talking about. Because as citizen developers, makers, active Power Platform creators, usually developers, we don't really care too much about data loss prevention policies until they impact you negatively. You're suddenly not allowed to use a connector because there's a DLP. Until then, you don't care about it. So what we're going to look at is basically what are DLPs, how do they work, how can they be applied, what's the impact, basically then for you as a maker, and a lot of it will be then basically hands-on. So a couple of intro slides, and then I'll just jump into the various hands-on activities. So again, my name is René Modry. I'm for nearly a year now the Power Platform technical lead at WPP. So Sanjeev just said it. We're a very large company and a very complex company. So operating worldwide with, I don't know how many employees worldwide overall, more than 100,000. I don't know where that actually stops right now, as in could be 120 or 110, not sure actually. But really means we're working globally. It also means we're not just one big company, we are a lot of companies. WPP, generally speaking, as you could say, I don't want to call it the big one on top, it's more that small corporate layer on top. Underneath that layer, then there's a big complex organizational construct with a lot of operating companies. So there's Group M, for example, there's Ogilvy, there's H&K, there's a lot of additional companies. We're actually in the media and advertisement industry, meaning then, for example, there was recently the Super Bowl in the US. So during the Super Bowl, there are lots of popular advertisements then during the halftime show. Some of those advertisements were, for example, also created, supported, or otherwise basically helped with by one of our operating companies as an example. Basically, company is, like I said, quite complex overall. From a technical point of view, that means we've got more than 10 tenants, but we're focusing only on 10 right now, as in those are, to me right now, the so-called 10 strategic tenants. Those are the ones that we are working with, where our focus is on. There may be a few more, but there has been a consolidation in the past few years. And any other tenant that might still be out there will likely get migrated into those existing tenants. And if you ask why not only one tenant, why 10? Obviously, 10 is already the best situation that we have right now. We are maybe aiming to move towards 9. Any further consolidation might be, I don't know, probably too much effort or so.
Yeah. Sorry, just a quick question. Are they federated?
There's a lot of trust between all of them. Obviously, not everything's perfect, but I'm going to come back to that probably at some point later. Gotcha. From a technical point of view, what it means is, yes, you've got basically 10 different tenants, 10 different instances of everything, but there's a certain trust between them. We are also working on making it easier for people to move between tenants. So if you've got a Power App in one tenant, that people in the other tenants can access it, for example.
Sorry, this is extremely exciting. So if I want Teams on one tenant, will I be able to see the, cannot?
No.
Okay, gotcha.
That's the ideal state. Why is that not possible? But we're working on it. So, for example, what you just described is there are ways how you can start working towards something like that. So through shared channels, for example, which is something that we are using for internal Power Platform community that we've got, for example, shared channels that we attach into every single tenant. So basically, you go into a team in your own home tenant and see basically the central team. That is accessible by everybody.
Gotcha.
Say so.
Gotcha.
But Microsoft also didn't have that technology, you could say, until very recently, obviously. So we're using some new functionalities as well that are not even in GA, so preview and such. So we're trying to push it as well, so that getting there.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, back on topic. So my role basically means then taking care of the 10 tenants, mostly from a planning, governance, management perspective. That also includes then looking at what do we need to make sure that we bring some more control into that chaos. When I say chaos, that's not meant in a negative sense, but as I mentioned, I just joined this role a year ago. Before that, I was within the organization in a different role, but a year ago, I joined the current role as technical lead for the Power Platform. There was no such team before that, basically. So we're a relatively new team now, just slightly over a year old. And what we basically started working with is 10 different tenants with the Power Platform inside, no one really taking care of them properly. So whatever people wanted to do, yeah, could we do.
Sorry, Renee. Let me just ask, you mentioned that you guys focus on like governance and like all of the guardrails, right? However, in terms of like enablement, adoption of those people, do you also handle that, or is there a different thing you also handle it? Okay.
So to say, the same team. I mean, as in, I'm the technical lead. My guys are then obviously the technical SMEs working mostly in terms of supporting people or so,
Right.
but that also moves a bit towards the adoption. So I've got some direct colleagues, you could say, as part of our broader Power Platform team who then look at how do we actually spread the message, how do we make sure that we've got, for example, events going on right now to make sure that people know what is the Power Platform, app in a day, or Power Automate in a day, those kind of things that they take place. So yes, we're not just looking at, we make sure that things are running technically because we want people also to use the platform and leverage as much as possible. So there's obviously no clear differentiation. You can't do one thing without the other.
Thank you.
Yeah, but yes, we could probably talk now about what else is happening and such. So coming back on topic to the data loss prevention policies. So as mentioned, I'm working on some governance management. Part of that was, hey, I'm going to move to the next slide. Power Platform, there are a lot of connectors. So when I checked just yesterday, 951 that I could see in actually the Power Platform Admin Center when I look at directly at the data loss prevention policies. So 900 plus connectors that allow me to a range of different systems. The big question then basically for us as a company was, do we want to allow all of that? Again, as a user, you're happy, whoa, there's a big wide world that I can use. I can connect to Dropbox, Excel, OpenAI. I can connect to Salesforce. I can connect to lots of other systems. Corporate perspective is, wait a second, why do you want to connect to Dropbox? Why do you want to connect to these other systems? We've got maybe better alternatives. Maybe we don't want you to connect to other systems because we don't know, hey, the data that you store there, does that actually comply with certain policies or various other reasons? What it also means, obviously, that these 951 connectors right now, it's not the final list. I remember I look at it regularly. It's been 600, 700, 800, 900, and pretty sure sometime this year we'll obviously hit 1,000, considering that you can also create your own connector and publish it. But yes, it's the big open growing platform, and that makes our life nicer as developers. But from a corporate perspective, you want to make sure, when there's a new connector, people shouldn't just start using it if you don't even know where the data is going. For example, let's say there's a new connector to connect to a third-party system. What do you know about that third-party system? People might be very excited to use it, like sending data to ChatGPT. Hey, that's awesome. We love it. But from a corporate perspective, hey, or maybe what if somebody sends sensitive data basically there? What happens with it or so? You might want to think about it first before you allow it, as an example. Long story short, so there are these concerns here that you want to enable your developers, your makers, to use it as much as possible. You don't want to just say, here are the 5 connectors that you're not allowed to use and the rest we block. No. Idea is then ideally you want to allow as much as possible, but still under consideration, then you need to do a review of, where does the data go? Is it okay, etc. Or maybe you also want to make sure that, hey, maybe it's okay to use Dropbox, but generally we don't want people to use Dropbox. So if you want to use it, come to us with a business case. Until then, it's, you could say, not allowed, but if you want to have it, we'll allow it for you, for example, because, again, SharePoint might be the preferred option internally. And that's not because I prefer SharePoint, but just general comment, basically. Yeah, so those are then basically a couple of those concerns. And how do we control that? And obviously, that's then through those data loss prevention policies, meaning that they allow you then to control in your tenant for a specific environment which connectors are allowed, which ones are not allowed, and which ones can you mix and match. That might be a bit quite theoretical right now, which is why I like to skip the slides now and really just show things in action, because then it becomes a lot clearer. So jumping in, let me just actually also zoom in a bit more. I'm here directly in the Power Platform Admin Center, PPAC. Over here on the left side, I've got my policies and I've got my data policies. So that's where I can then see, edit my existing data loss prevention policies. So right now, I don't have a policy here in my tenant, meaning any app that I create, any flow that I create, I can use any connector. What I can do is I can now say, I want to create a new policy again. Doing it simple, I'm giving my policy a name. Let's just call it Global Power Platform Bootcamp Demo Policy. No, demo, yeah. Just giving it a descriptive name, obviously, and saying next. Now, this is the screen where I just showed you as well. So this is where you can then see all the connectors that are available right now. And I say right now, it's really a live snapshot all the time. I would not have been surprised if it had shown now 952, for example. We can do the same session tomorrow, and there might be a new connector, or theoretically, one of the connectors could have been retired. But again, those are all the connectors that are available right now. What we see here as well, let me just zoom in a bit more. We've got here actually two different categories. We've got business, non-business, and blocked. That's important. What I mentioned is that we cannot just basically say, oh, we allow connector and block it, but we've got basically three different options. Yes, we can block it, meaning then you're just not allowed to use it at all. Or we can put it into the business and non-business categories. So what it means then, business, non-business, that's just basically a naming convention. It doesn't have any impact at all. So everything is now in non-business. That doesn't mean that you can't use this for a business. It just means it's just one name. You could also call it Group A and Group B or something like that. But simply said, the connectors that are in one of these two groups here cannot be used together with the connectors in the other group. So right now, they're all in here right now in non-business. Let's say I'm taking here my Dropbox connector. I'm going to say I'm moving this now over to business. You see now I've got 950 connectors in my non-business. And over in business, I've got only my Dropbox connector. I'm still allowed to create a flow. I'm still allowed to create an app that, for example, uses the Dropbox connector, but they're only allowed to use the Dropbox connector. The moment you say, I also want to send an email or connect to an Excel spreadsheet or Azure blob storage or so, not possible anymore. You will get a warning saying, oh, you've got basically this set of connectors which have a conflict with this data loss prevention policy. So idea is then within your policy, you decide then basically which connectors are blocked and which connectors do you want to put into, again, these two categories, and then make sure that maybe you want to say some connectors are in business, some are in non-business, and some are blocked. Now, our thinking as a company initially, or my thinking as somebody starting to work with it was, I'm not quite sure how often we want to basically make the differentiation here between business and non-business, because we generally say right now we want to block things, not because we're not telling people you're not allowed to use it at all, but because we're telling people, oh, if you want to use, for example, Dropbox, contact us with your business request first. What do you want to do with Dropbox? Because we don't want you to store your company files in there. They should be in our SharePoint sites or in a team, for example. That's our corporate standard that has been set up with our retention policies. We've got backup there, we've got support there, et cetera, et cetera. So if you store something in Dropbox and it gets lost, then yeah, that would not be good. We can't help you, basically. But again, we might say then, yes, you should still be allowed to use Dropbox, for example, if you, I don't know, connect to a third-party company's Dropbox because they've given you access to it and you need to download a file every day, something like that. There are valid use cases, obviously. So long story short, what you can do is you've got these three categories and you can then say where you want to put something like I just did. I'm going to point out a small drawback here right now. What if I want to move 300, 400 connectors from non-business into blocked? How do I do that? I can spend the next few days doing that, obviously. That's not going to be very fun, actually. So the UI is not the best way to do that, actually. Then we can hire the intern to do that. The intern will not be happy either, but faster ways than, for example, to automate it. There are ways how that can be done through, for example, actually Power Automate, obviously, or through PowerShell. And I'm going to demo one of them a bit later. Good. Anyway, so that's how that could be done. One other thing I want to mention here on this screen is, so we see the 3 different groups, and we see here, oh, the non-business is called the default group. And here in the top right, I can actually also change it. What is the default group? Default group is where any new connector actually gets added to. As mentioned, there are new connectors, I won't say every day, but every week there are new connectors basically. What happens when there's a new connector? Let's say there's a new connector that connects to, I don't know, third-party system ABC. Where does that connector end up in? In the default group. That's actually then important because what you might say is any new connector that shows up, I want to make sure that it doesn't basically become available to everyone right away. Maybe we want to do an internal security review first to see what's the impact of using it. Again, where does the data flow? What does that company do? Do they have better alternatives? And yeah, just reviewing it. So what we did as a company is, for example, we have a classification where we then say for connectors generally, these are all the allowed connectors. The ones that we are generally allowing across the board, that's now, I'm just going to say around half of it. I think the number was 450 or so. I can't remember the exact number, but half of them are just generally allowed. That's then your SharePoint, your Teams, all the Azure connectors, and a lot of others where we know they're actually in use and people use them. What we also did is then we thought there's now still, again, half of it is where we say we don't really know that right away, whether we want to allow it or not. But we don't want to do a review of 400 connectors and see, okay, do we want to allow it or not? That's too much effort because we also check, are they even in use? And we know they're not in use right now, so we're not going to make a decision. If somebody wants to use it, talk to us so we can make a decision then what to do with it. Long story short, basically, we separated them into different categories. A lot of them are blocked right now, and the other half is basically then allowed right now. And any new connector gets blocked right away as well. But if somebody wants to use it, then again, company perspective is not really saying, hey, it's blocked, so it's blocked forever, but rather we blocked it for the moment. But if you think you want to use it, then we can review it and see what can be done. Coming back to then again a bit later. So let's say we now keep this list here as it is. I've got now Dropbox in the left here under business, and I've got all the other connectors under non-business, all good. Next step, custom connectors. Let's quickly review them. There's nothing actually in there. So you could actually add some specific patterns for your custom connectors. To keep things a bit short today, I'm just going to skip them. I'm only looking now at the pre-built connectors that are provided out of the box for your Canvas apps and Power Automate flows. Next thing, that's the important part now. So we're talking about the connectors that we want to allow and not allow. But what if you now say, hey, generally we, again, specifically say the Dropbox connector should be blocked, but somebody should be allowed to use it. How do we handle that? There are now a few different scenarios. For any DLP policy that you create, you can then define what's the scope of it. You can say add the policy generally across the board to all environments. Existing plus new environments will be basically impacted by that DLP. Or you've got the other two options. You can either say, I want to apply this policy then to selected environments, or the reverse, I want to say, I want to apply that policy to all environments except for a few others. And that's now the interesting part. We as a company decided we're just going to start with a default policy. So we said, yes, we applied across all environments. We don't want to apply an individual policy per environment because anyone who looks at how many environments you have in your tenant, and if you're a certain size within your company, you realize there are lots of environments. In our largest tenant, for example, we had 130 environments, I think, or more. That's basically last year's number. I'm not looking at it anymore, but you get the idea. I don't want to define 130 different policies. I'm only defining one policy here, applying it to all environments, and then basically saying, yeah, applying it, next, create. I'm not going to create yet because I'm just going to throw out a warning first. The moment you apply a policy here right now, it's going to start to take effect. Apps will be impacted immediately. Any existing running flows will be impacted within the next few minutes. what does impact mean? So let's say, for example, let's just go back to our pre-built connectors here. If I say now, I've got a flow here that is now using, for example, the Dropbox connector and, I don't know, the Outlook email connector, for example, there would now be a conflict if I applied that policy, because the flow is using two connectors from two different categories here, conflict, not allowed to be used. But the flow is already on and running. If I apply my policy now, that means then the flow is not compliant with this policy, it is in violation of this policy, so it will be suspended, again, within the next 5 minutes approximately. Similar for apps, if you've got an app that does something similar, uses different connectors, maybe even a block connector, then the moment I apply the policy and somebody tries to open the app, they get that warning. Sorry, app is in violation, you're not allowed to use it. So really, I mean, from a compliance point of view, security point of view, that's good. You apply the policy, it happens right away. For me, as you could say, an admin, or maybe as somebody who is preparing the policy, before I click create policy, I want to figure out what kind of impact does that have. I'm just saying, yeah, I want to create a policy now. It affects all the environments, but how many apps are impacted? How many flows are impacted? What's going to happen once I click create? I wouldn't know that here, actually. So the moment you click create, you better ensure that you don't have any negative impact. I'm saying that because it happens that we're a bit too fast with clicking create.
Yeah, but about that, that's a really good insight. So what do you guys do? Do you have like a survey focus? Or sorry, I might preempt your, okay, go ahead.
No, that's a good question, because I start to prepare a mini slide for it. I'm just going to jump to it here. How can we analyze the impact of a DLP then? Because again, we want to know which apps and flows would be impacted before we apply the policy. Now, luckily, there's basically a way to figure it out. Not so good is that it's not built in directly anywhere in the platform. What we have actually is, I mean, generally speaking, as mentioned, 10 tenants, lots of apps and flows, lots of environments. We want to govern it better, get an idea of what's there. So we deployed the Power Platform COE toolkit into all those tenants, which gives us the big inventory of things. We know all the apps and flows, where they are, what they do, what kind of connectors they use, etc. Plus, as part of the COE toolkit, there's also this DLP editor app, which is nearly a copy of what I just demoed directly in the admin center. So you see, basically, I can give it a name, I can see my connectors, I define the scope, which environment should be used, but I've also got here, I'll show it here, impact analysis here on the left. Impact analysis is actually a very good thing here. It's not perfect, but it helps you a lot in the sense of before you create your policy, you run that impact analysis, which is a flow then running, which then checks, okay, you defined your policy, and I'm going to check now based on what I know about your apps and flows and the connectors that they use. Are there any conflicts? What will happen? Will anything be suspended or so? And once that happens, then you will receive an email with 2 attachments, 2 CSV files, which then contain more information about it. So let me just open that. So what you then get is something like this one here. So basically just a quick overview of which app will be impacted by a policy. And let me just check here, for example, which app will be impacted, who's the owner, in which environment is it, obviously, so you know where is it, etc. Plus the important thing then, which connections does the app use? So you can then see, oh, for example, the first one uses the MySQL connector. So that means then, for example, yes, probably this connector has been blocked, or here text analytics probably blocked, or here that might have been Skype for Business Online as an example. So this then actually allows you, before you apply your policy, hey, I want to see what has been or what could potentially be impacted, and then basically deal with it. When I say deal with it, I'm coming back to that again a bit later, because you might need to have separate ways of handling it then. Because here, 3 different apps, that's quite easy, not an issue, but when you just quickly look at the flows I've got here, let me just check here, 861 flows. I don't want to ask, I don't know, couple of hundred people, hey, your flow, what can we do or so? No, that's, we want to deal with that obviously in a smarter way. I think that key thing here was actually the HTTP connector. So depending on your policy, obviously that varies, but here I know, for example, the connectors is a common pattern of HTTP. So that was, for example, a connector that we knew would have a big impact if we restrict it or block it, as an example. Anyway, so you get then basically a CSV file that you can then use for further analysis and further action. So I'm going to do a quick demo on that in a while then. All right, coming back into this one here. So let's say I've got now, I'm going to change that actually. I'm not going to put it into business. I'm going to block Dropbox for some bigger impact. Think about it. Okay, before I block it, just a quick comment. You've also got some more fine-grained possibilities. For example, for this connector here, I can say I want to configure the actions. So as you can see here, I can now say, yeah, all these are currently allowed. Maybe I don't want to allow all of it. So you're not allowed to delete files as an example. So again, this is connector specific. There are then, depending on the connector, further configuration options or possibilities. From a corporate point of view, right now we said we don't care about it that much. We don't want to go through 900 connectors and individually review every single action. Then, yeah, that will give us enough to do for a year or so, but will not be a valuable time, basically. So yes, we just said we allow the actions generally, or the connector might be just generally blocked. If there's a specific use case, we'll just review it on demand, which might then mean, yes, we allow the Dropbox connector, but you're not allowed to delete files as an example. There is that possibility. Anyway, coming back here, I'm just going to block it now. Good, so now it's over here and blocked. I'm going to go to review, and before I create it, I'm just going to show you that I've got actually an app and a flow as well. Here I've got my Dropbox test flow. I'm just going to run that just to show you that it is still running. That one is a very simple flow that we'll see in a second. All it does is basically get all the content in the root directory of my Dropbox. Nothing fancy at all. So let's just go to the run history for this flow. Then we'll see, yes, it just succeeded 13 seconds ago. And as mentioned, it's a very simple one. It runs and just basically gets the list files in root folder. Nothing fancy here. I could have added more, but I want to keep it simple here right now in terms of what we demo here. Power Apps, I've also got a small Dropbox app here. Let me just actually open that as well. That one is a bit similar. All I'm getting is the contents of a spreadsheet stored in Dropbox. Quite simple. There's just some data in there. I'm retrieving that as a data source. Loading, there it is. That's some data that is right directly in Dropbox right now in a spreadsheet. Again, I'm not going to update that, but I'm just going to say, trust me on this. It's really a spreadsheet in Dropbox. We will see it once I actually block the connector then. So if I now go back to the admin center, I'm going to create my policy. Now what I'm doing is I'm saying I allow everything else except for Dropbox, which has been blocked. So here's my policy. I see who created it and when it was modified. And I can go back to edit just to verify again, what did I actually set up just now? And we can see then on the rebuild connectors, yes, 950 here, one over here. Let's just see if it's happening right away for my app here. That's the exciting part because, yeah, it's still working. Might obviously, I mentioned earlier, flows take a few minutes. Apps, I realize sometimes it's get blocked right away. Sometimes it also takes a while. So maybe I'll just refresh again in a few minutes again.
While you're doing this, if you take the broad umbrella of DLP, you also get into labeling, like sensitivity labeling, especially on the modern world side, right? How does that figure over here? If a file has a label that is confidential, that should
not directly impacting then what's happening here. For example, let's say you used a file that is labeled as I don't know, sensitive, and you've got some IRM on top of it. You could still take that file and copy it or do things with it through Power Automate XM.
The reason why I asked that is that on the Power BI side, I could get into labeling in the Power BI Admin Center. So I was wondering if it had percolated here?
No. Basically, there's no direct connection between the two of them, so they work separately. But again, you would still be protected and through whatever.
But on the entries, you would be protected.
Yes. Yeah. So I could still take, I don't know, your file and bring it somewhere else and do things with it. Not an issue.
Yeah.
Here, I'm just preventing me from taking that file and putting it somewhere else.
Right.
So it's a different way of managing things.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just gonna go and see what happens when I try to edit this flow and see if it's complaining right away. So the drawback of doing a live demo when there might not be much happening, but all right, good. That was already a complaint right now. Let me just zoom in. That's now basically the error that you get as a maker. So now it tells me, oh, you've got a flow. I wanted to make a change to it, but I'm not allowed because operation violates the admin data policy, blah, blah, blah. And you see then there's more information and can contact the admin, etc. So again, I get some information about, hey, I'm trying to use something here which uses the connector shared Dropbox. Hopefully that will be renamed soon, so it's the user-friendly name, not the internal name. But idea is then, yes, I as a maker now get that warning. I'm not allowed to do it. Plus, I get information. Oh, here I can find out more, and I need to go contact my admin for further help. So as mentioned, from our corporate point of view, then we said, oh, you want to use a specific connector? Get in touch with us. Obviously, you can't reach 100,000 people and tell them, hey, talk to us about connectors, because 99.99% don't care about that. But those who do care, they need to know who to talk to. And that's why we did something similar here that's actually configurable. And then we basically put in our link to our SharePoint site, I think it was, or to a PDF basically with information about the DLP policies plus our central mailbox to contact us. So we want to make sure that if somebody really wants to use a connector, they know who to go to. Anyway, we can see I cannot update this flow, yeah?
What about the custom connectors? If we can use, this is a Dropbox, but there may be some storage, right? Maybe some QuickBook which has a no connector. So when you write custom connector, it can DLP policy can
yeah.
With this?
So you could also define a policy for custom connectors then. So what you have then is, let me just jump back here, custom connectors, you define basically the URL pattern that is allowed. So you might say everything is blocked except maybe whichever endpoints you are using then, or something like that. There is a policy. Obviously then it gets a bit tricky with you need to plan it properly and such, but there are such possibilities here then as well. Okay, I'm just going to quickly check if I can create a new flow. That might hopefully give me the same error. So if I say now, I'm just going to create a new instant flow. Manually triggering it. New step. Looking for my Dropbox again. Oh. Go Dropbox. I can still see the connector. I can still use it. I can click a bit too fast. I didn't want this one. List file. Is this the one I want? And that might just be, yeah, just give me the root maybe. Okay. Trying to save it, and oh, it immediately gives me the same error again that we just saw. So if I try to create a new flow, I just get the same error. So again, it tells me I'm not allowed to use the Dropbox connector here right now inside this environment. Just going to try and see if something's happening over here in this app. If I try to run it, if not, I've got a screenshot that I can show you as a backup. Now that's still working. What if I edit this app? Will complain then. So idea is then obviously as an end user, you might get a different kind of error message than as a maker. So what happens is, I'm just going to show that because it might take a while to appear, which was here on the left side. We can see here now if you try to open an app that has been basically blocked now by the DLP, or that uses connector that's not allowed, or there's a conflict basically with the DLP, then you get app isn't opening correctly because it's not compliant with latest.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Currently, you are setting up the policies. I'm getting to know the end step, because that means I need to. Nobody knows. Let's say I forgot. I haven't looked at my central list that these are the applicable directors. Is there any way like we can filter in that search criteria itself, whatever we are displaying? Ideally, right? Why should I see Dropbox? That's my.
Yeah.
The users will ask, or a developer will ask, if Dropbox is blocked, why are you showing Dropbox? So is there any way we can filter that list?
No, basically all because it's maybe some feedback from Microsoft in that case. You're creating a flow in an environment, you're looking for Dropbox, you see Dropbox, and only after you try to save, then it tells you not. Why not tell you earlier? I agree, actually, yes, because I create something after some time.
After you do all the things, then only you're getting to know. That means.
Yeah, that's right. Agreed. No, there's nothing that we can do here, actually.
And feedback.
Feedback, yeah. And, okay, let me just make a small change. So I'm just gonna take my table here, make a small format change and try to save. All right, here. And you can see again another warning. So now it tells me, you're not allowed to save again because not compliant with the DLP. So again, my app is still there. It didn't get blocked for me from accessing it. But if I want to continue using it, I would have to, remove the Dropbox connector. What if I now say, wait a minute, you can't block my app here. Or if you look at, again, basically what I showed you here, our 800 flows and our 3 apps. I want to roll out a policy. I want to make sure that people can't use the Dropbox connector, for example, right away. They shouldn't be allowed to use it. But anybody who's using it right now, ideally I want to talk to them first, but I would still want to roll out my policy quickly. What can I do? I don't want to wait until all the discussions are done, but rather I should maybe exempt those existing apps and flows. And that's basically what can be done here as an intermediate step. So you say, I'm preparing my policy. This policy, what we then say, for example, let me just come back here. What we see, I define the scope for my policy. I said here, apply to all environments. From our point of view, then what we realize the best step is we create a blank environment called DLP preparation. We create a policy and only apply that policy to this environment. So we've got the policy prepared, but it's applied to an environment where there's nothing inside. So it's really just, a template, you could say, or prepared but not applied yet. And then we can basically talk to people and say, okay, we're going to apply this policy and your app will be impacted. This will be the result. But we will exempt your app and flow. Exemption means then once we apply this policy, then across the tenant, any apps and flows that have been exempted will not be impacted by it. That's the good news. The bad news is we need to know which apps and flows are impacted, which is why we need to use that DLP editor app that I mentioned as part of the COE starter kit, not part right now of the existing platform. So a bit tricky to get there, especially if you're a smaller company. If you don't have the COE toolkit installed, then difficult to figure out. Anyway, ideas then, what we then did basically is we prepared the policy in a blank environment. We've got the policy ready. We know the policy is there because policy is not just attached to environment, but you basically attach the environments, you could say, to the policy. So we can make these changes later, but the policy exists obviously with a unique ID. We've got the policy. We can then figure out what happens if we apply. So we get the list of apps and flows. With this list of apps and flows, we can then say we want to exempt all of them. An exemption is, again, something that can't be done through the UI, but you have to use PowerShell for it. So we develop a small script here that just uses some existing Microsoft PowerShell commandlets, basically. What it does is, there's a lot of fancy stuff here happening. What it does basically is just calling the key commandlets here. I'm not going to go through it in detail because it's boring. All it does basically takes the CSV files that we got from the DLP editor, where we know, oh, inside that DLP file, we've got all the app IDs, all the flow IDs. And then it tells basically the Power Platform, hey, you also have this policy here, our new policy that we want to use, exempt all of these apps and flows from our CSV file from this policy. And that's about it. So it's a long script basically, but that's just making sure that we got it all prepared and triple confirmed so that you're not accidentally applying the policy when you shouldn't. As mentioned, this might happen, this did happen, but
currently there is no provision through UI. We have to do using the PowerShell script only.
Yeah, only PowerShell then. So if you want to, I don't know, in the UI, exempt an app, not possible, it has to be done through PowerShell.
Earlier you mentioned, right, you will create a new environment and you will keep the old environment as it is.
Yeah.
So in that new environment, whatever the new apps being onboarded or the flows being onboarded will automatically come to that.
That's the other thing as well, yes. I mean, the new environment that I mentioned, for example, that we created is really just a placeholder environment for the DLPs. Our idea is, let me just actually show you, for example, let's go to, where is it? Here.
Okay.
For example, environments. So let's say in my own tenant, I don't have many environments because it's just me. I think there's 2 or 3 of them. Let's just check. But ideas then, not going to load right now. Again, you've got your environments here, for example. Okay, there's 2 environments right now.
Okay.
You create your blank environment that you just call DLP staging or preparation or something like that.
Okay.
And you don't do anything else. Once you apply a policy to any environment, any new app and flow will be impacted obviously by it, but also any existing app and flow. They're all immediately impacted by that policy then.
Okay.
What it also means then, if you then say, for example, that you create a new environment here and you don't apply policy to it, what happens then basically? For example, let's say I create a new environment here. Will a policy be applied to it or not? That's why what we have, for example, you remember I said that that's coming through. We can define the scope for policy.
Okay.
So what we actually did is we defined one tenant-wide policy that applies to all environments.
Correct.
So that way we can ensure whatever happens, any new environment that gets created, and subsequently, obviously, any new app and flow, regardless of where they get created, they are covered by that DLP. That's been a good thing.
For all new, we can enforce the new policy. For all existing, we can still exempt for a time being.
Correct, yes,
Like
yeah.
that.
And again, exemption is you exempt it from a specific policy. So if you exempt them from policy A, but not policy B, then policy B applies to them, obviously. Then, but it's a tricky thing. It requires a lot of planning.
Okay. Or is there any way, like for all the new apps, we can enforce a new policy for all existing, even though they are using the blocked connectors or something, we can still allow them for time being until they migrate to the new
Only
one?
through exemption, no other way, basically. Yeah.
No. My question is, so let's say I have already an app or flow existing in the blocked connector something. So you are exempting the existing app. So if I want to create a new flow, okay, will the new policy can be enforced for all the new flows in the entire ecosystem?
Yeah.
Okay.
But now the reverse, actually. Let's say you want to create a flow that should not be impacted by the policy specifically because you say, again, coming back to Dropbox, you want to use the Dropbox Connect. And I say, yes, you're allowed to use the Dropbox Connect. What can we do? Because you're not allowed to create a new app. You can't save it if it wants to use Dropbox.
Okay.
Becomes a bit tricky. What you then do usually is, for example, you create a new environment, for example. You say, again, that might be then depending on scenarios. So, but you might create an environment specific for apps that are allowed to use Dropbox, for example.
Got it.
Or you create a new app, a new environment specifically for a team that wants to use Dropbox, for example. And then you need to start
You
thinking
need to apply
ahead.
separate
So
policies there.
this policy still applies. Dropbox is still blocked. And that's the moment and where you then change it and say, oh, this policy is no longer applied to the whole
All
tenant,
environment.
but
So
I'm going to exclude
certain
my
environment.
yes. So it's not just saying, oh, I'm going to put it in there once and everything's
That's right.
perfect, but you're constantly managing and planning.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Just to that point, creating new environments is not a joke.
Yeah.
It should not be a joke that you randomly go create. To me, an environment represents a business unit. It's a business unit. So unless you go change the organizational design and create new business units, you're not going to be there. So it can really muck things up.
we know basically even your connector decisions that you made might change. Your overall strategy is constantly changing in a way. I would say even our current thinking, the way we do things with the DLPs in our environments, we know that at some point we need to update it again because something's gonna come up where we know it's not gonna work for us at that point in time. So we know what we have is working for us right now, but we don't know if it's still gonna continue working for us in 6 months' time or so, because again, somebody might come with a very specific scenario. But we hope we're flexible enough to deal with most of it, but also making sure that we don't have to work too much with DLPs on an operational scale, because we don't want to day in, day out deal with DLPs. Ideally, it's something you configure, I don't want to say once, but you configure it and then let it run until you might have to update it again in a long time ago. So anyway, so we just talked about also what if there's a policy that's actually applied to it across the tenant, and what if I apply a separate policy? So theoretically, what if there are multiple DLPs applied to one environment? Because we might have, again, a few different policies running around there. Some are applied to, again, the whole tenant, or some are applied to specific environments. What happens then? What you could have is, again, multiple policies. Here's an example of 3 different policies. And you can see here, basically, these policies are going to have business, non-business, keeping it simple right now. And in each business and non-business, there are different connectors. So we can see, for example, SharePoint is in business in, let's just see it here. SharePoint is in business in policy A, in business in policy B, but it's in non-business in policy C. And you can see basically there's a lot of different variation that's possible. What you get now is that, I don't want to call it a matrix, to me that's more of a big mess because it becomes quite complicated. And I know that because this table here on the right, that was actually something that was coming right from the Microsoft documentation. I updated the table to put it in the table format to make it clearer, because previously it was just a lot of text where I realized if I go through and struggle with it, others go through. So I try to put it in the table so it's clearer. But basically your input on the left is what you see here. Your output on the right is what you see on the right side here, meaning in your environment where you've got these 3 different policies, you can use, for example, the Microsoft 365 Outlook connector within your flow. But you might not be allowed to use this one together with SharePoint because SharePoint is blocked in policy C, but allowed in policy A and B, for example. So we see Outlook is always in E1, E3, E5, but SharePoint is also in E6, where it's in non-business. Suddenly, you've got SharePoint in 2 different locations. So that means then, long story short, SharePoint can't be used with Microsoft 365 Outlook. And we're only looking at a couple of connectors here. The moment you think about the whole thing, I haven't figured out a way to figure out what happens when. So recommendation is keep your policies to a minimum inside the environment. Yes, maybe 2 max, so I wouldn't apply more. That's
you actually bring up an interesting point, because if you've got OneDrive, what's the need to buy Dropbox?
I don't know.
So
I know it. I mean, from my perspective, we put Dropbox into blocked, if I remember correctly. But somebody came to us and said, "Oh, I need Dropbox," but not because she wants to store files there, but because one of our partners basically has files in Dropbox that she needs to retrieve on a daily basis. That makes sense.
So to me, this almost becomes a business conversation, rather than just a technology conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. So the initial decision, for example, when it comes to how do we categorize our connectors into business, non-business blocked, was done mainly from a security point of view again, where we know, okay, we're going to simply say trust all of the Microsoft content because we've got content in Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, Azure, etc., etc. No reason for us to block any of that because then we're shooting in our own foot. That's used across the company. Other connectors, we don't know what they're could be used for. We know that they're actually not used, but yes, that's why if somebody comes to us, then we're not having a technical discussion only, but again, a business discussion, like what I just described. I mean, technically, yes, you should use SharePoint and not Dropbox, for example, but if our partner is using Dropbox, then we can't tell you, no, you're not allowed to use it, but rather it's in a business request saying, we need to access the content through a flow, so, okay, we're not storing files over there, we're just retrieving files, perfect. should be allowed. That's in the business discussion, absolutely. All right, I think we're also slowly running out of time. So
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I think we've got
Yeah.
1 second actually before you. Amanda, do you have to run now? Because we could temporarily maybe, because it's getting towards the end of the presentation.
It's okay. We can
That's
wait
okay.
until.
Another 5 minutes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
okay.
no
All right,
problem.
go ahead.
So I mentioned basically the UI the whole time, but I also mentioned PowerShell, quickly showed, for example, the exemption PowerShell script. There's also a few other options. So on the right side here, you see the resource exemption commandlets. So you can exempt existing resources, for example, from a policy. That's all on the right side. On the left side, we see how we can define a new policy. Now, as I mentioned, we've got 10 tenants. We've got hundreds of connectors. We don't want to maintain all of that manually because then my colleagues would have probably resigned by now if they had to do that all the time. What we have is, we've got here, for example, a CSV file where we keep track of, I don't want to say all the connectors, but a good number, I think 400 or 500. Just check. Maybe we have now 430, for example. And as you can see, all we're doing here right now is we're putting these connectors, just move it a bit so it's clearer here. We're putting all these connectors into different categories. We've got confidential, which is the internal name for the business category that we saw. We've got general here below, which is then the non-business category, and then we've got blocked, which is obviously blocked. What we then basically say is all these connectors we put into these specific categories. And you can see, for example, the only ones that we put into non-business are Yammer and Skype for Business. We wanted to block them. They can't be blocked, so we just put them somewhere else. Idea was not, we don't want people to use them, but Skype for Business is not a system we're using anymore, so there's no apparent reason to use it. Yammer was similar, not really much usage, so yeah, could have been used or so, but yeah, anyway. What we now do is basically we have a script now that, open it. So what we have is basically a script. As mentioned, we have all those tenants that we need to maintain. What we want to do is we want to automate it as much as possible. Options were either we create a flow that does that. There's the Power Platform for Admins connector, which could be used, which also has some DLP actions, or we could use PowerShell. I chose PowerShell in the end. That was a bit easier to run quickly against different tenants. I mean, was a smaller preference, could have been gone the other way. Basically, what we then did is basically we have that long script here, does a lot of logic. All it does, in simple words, is it takes this CSV file as input. It then moves the connectors into the corresponding destination. If a connector doesn't show up in that list, then we put it into the blocked list generally, obviously. Then we're just saying, we don't know about you, you're blocked now, and then it saves the policy. So I'm just going to try to run it.
It's just 140 lines, man. It's not.
That was, I don't know how many hours of sweat and tears and pain. Okay, my policy display name was, what I need to have is actually an existing policy. So what we said is, we just take a default policy, demo, and our policy details file is default connectors. Now I just need to log in, but luckily I'm already signed in, so it should be easy. I hope. Okay, it gets my perfect. It gets my DLP policy back here. I found a total of 429 connector decisions in my file, which we just saw. And again, that warning: do you want to proceed? Because I'm not going to say it again, but mistakes were made previously, which were a bit painful and took a few hours to rectify. But yes, I'm updating it. It finds, 950 non-business connectors, 1 block connector. Now I'm basically going through it. So now it's doing a lot of stuff. Let's see how quickly it goes. And I hope it's not getting stuck now. I haven't run it in a couple of days, weeks. But yeah, we see now, things are actually getting updated. So now things got moved over to the block because it discovered a lot of connectors in non-business, etc. updating policy, saving it back, and yeah, it's all done. So if we go back here, I still have my original scope here, as in what I defined, 950 and 1. I'm just going to go out and come back in again. And what we should see now is basically that it has spread it out. Yes, nice. So we see now 420 in business, 2 in non-business, and everything else is blocked. And that's basically how we started to approach things, because we knew nobody likes to go in and manually select them. We try to automate it as much as possible and simplify our lives. So that's why this PowerShell script has been a huge time saver for us, actually. Then we realized then the whole process that we have, for example, also with the DLP editor app to perform the impact analysis and exemption and then applying a policy, all those kind of things are much easier now, thanks to the PowerShell scripts that basically help us here. Now, that's basically the current status of how things are working with the DLP policies. Maybe just think if I had anything else here. Talked about this. Yeah, no. Good. So yeah, that's how things work right now. There should be some improvements coming sometime this year as well, but I don't know yet what those improvements are. But based on our experience, for example, we shared a lot of feedback with Microsoft and with the product group to make sure that they are aware of, hey, big customer here, these are all our pain points. What can you do actually? Because if we have trouble, then your smaller 50-person company is, I don't know, that might be too much effort for them. So make it easier for them. Anyway, so things might happen.
Your question, yeah, which is so pertinent.
Yeah.
Fantastic, Rene.